Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Always a pleasure to visit with U.S. Senator John Cornyn. Good morning, sir. How are you today?
Good morning, Chad. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's a busy time in Congress, busy time in the Senate, and a lot of talk lately has been about this big stimulus package. What is it, a $1.9 trillion stimulus package that is going to be voted on in the U.S. Senate?
Yeah, we'll be taking that up today and tomorrow and probably all night tomorrow night. Unfortunately, this represents a departure from the bipartisan work we've done this last year. We passed $4 trillion worth of COVID-19 relief, both to come up with a vaccine, which is really the key to ending this pandemic, and trying to mitigate some of the economic harm, try to help schools get kids back in classrooms and the like. That's all been bipartisan until now, and for some reason, Speaker Pelosi, President Biden, Chuck Schumer, they want to pass a $1.9 trillion bill that only 9% of it has to do with COVID-19, less than 1% of it has to do with vaccinations. And they've got things like a bridge from Canada to New York to Canada for Chuck Schumer, an earmark for him and Nancy Pelosi, a tunnel apparently in the Silicon Valley. I mean, this is a ridiculous spending, and it's borrowed money and going to add to the debt. If we had to do this in an emergency to deal with COVID-19, that's one thing. But all this recklessness when it comes to spending on non-COVID-19 while claiming that it is COVID-19, I think is just sheer hypocrisy.
Well, and this is nothing new necessarily. I mean, we've seen this in just about every bill that's been passed with COVID relief, quote unquote COVID relief, is that, yeah, there's a little bit of stimulus here for the average American, but there's a lot of money here for some of these other pet projects.
There is, and you know, we need to pull together as a country dealing with the pandemic, but we are now seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The economy is coming back. Governor Abbott, of course, has eliminated the state mask mandate, leaving it up to us as responsible individuals to protect ourselves and our families while getting more and more people vaccinated. And I just think this is, in the immortal words of Rahm Emanuel years ago, he said, never let a crisis go to waste. And I think that's what they're doing here by exploiting this in order to do these pet projects.
Looking into the crystal ball that I know you have there in your Senate office, how do this vote? We've heard that it's not going to go well for the Democrats. I mean, is that holding true that the Democrats are going to lose this vote?
Well, they're losing some of their pet projects, like the $15 minimum wage mandate. The parliamentarian said that's not going to be in this bill. Also, some of these other projects are falling by the wayside, which demonstrates what happens when you try to do things on strictly a partisan basis. If we could come together and do something that made sense, that was targeted, we could do like we did all last year, is pass another bill that makes sense while we continue to get more shots in more people's arms and continue to open up our economy and get kids safely back in school. That ought to be our goal, not figuring out how to raid the U.S. Treasury.
How many other things can Democrats do, I guess, this year through reconciliation?
Well, as you know, we're a 50-50 Senate, which means that when we're tied, that the vice president can come in and break that tie. And reconciliation, as you know, makes it possible to do that with 51 votes rather than the normal 60 votes. The idea in the Senate is that you want to build consensus. That's what the 60-vote requirement does if you're going to pass laws affecting 330 million people. But I'm sure they're going to try to do some other things using reconciliation, including tax increases. Of course, with all this spending, they want to raise taxes, which to me, as the economy is coming out of this recession, is exactly the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. visiting with U.S. Senator John Cornyn here on the Chad Hasty Show. You brought up Governor Abbott yesterday. He was here in Lubbock, Texas, and talked about the mask mandate going away and restrictions going away on business capacity beginning next Wednesday. What are your thoughts on what the governor announced yesterday?
Well, we're a long way from where we were a year ago in terms of understanding the virus and what we needed to get through this pandemic. But we were emerging from the darkest days of the pandemic, and now I think it's quite appropriate for government to step back and say, you as an individual still have your personal responsibility. You know what to do to protect yourself and your family. And if you want to wear a mask, go ahead and wear a mask. But government's not going to limit your liberty and dictate to you exactly what you have to do, particularly as we're seeing now somewhere north of 70 million people have already been vaccinated. President Biden said now he expects that every American who wants the vaccine will be vaccinated by the end of May. So, and we can't act like this pandemic is just one-dimensional either, Chad. We know with kids not being in school, they're falling further and further behind. People with mental health crises, drug overdoses, suicides. I mean, the mitigation efforts that we've undertaken here not only have destroyed many, many businesses and jobs, but really destroyed some people's lives. So I think what the governor's ordered is quite appropriate, because he's basically telling us, you know what to do, just go out and do it.
Visiting with Senator John Cornyn here on the Chad Hasty Show. Senator, I need to ask you, it's a separate topic than the mask and coronavirus, and that is gun issues. And as you can imagine, a lot of concerned members of my audience that are out there seeing that Democrats are coming up with different legislation targeting the Second Amendment and wondering if some of these pieces of legislation are going to get through the Senate. One of those pieces of legislation, H.R. 8, which would expand background checks for a firearm sale if signed into law. Apparently, this has bipartisan support in the House. This came up before in 2019 in the Senate, and it did not get through the Senate at this time. Obviously, the numbers are different. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think again, with a 50-50 Senate, Chad, it's going to require some Democratic opposition for us to be able to stop the most extreme measures. But as you know, a lot of the gun control measures are not designed just to keep guns out of the hands of people who are mentally ill or who are convicted criminals, which have broad bipartisan support. But they want to keep guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens, which I certainly oppose as being inconsistent with the Second Amendment. It's ironic at a time they want to defund the police and they want to make sure that the police can't respond to emergency calls and maintain public safety. They also want to disarm the American people, and we're not going to let it happen. I think we'll find bipartisan opposition to that and be able to stop it in the Senate.
Do they, for a 60 vote threshold in the Senate, does that mean? Do they have to get to 60 votes for
right. Yeah,
everything?
They need 10 Republicans to join them, and I can't imagine that would happen.
Okay, yeah. So that's at least a little bit of relief out there for some of the gun owners, and I guess there's not much they can do through reconciliation on the gun issue.
No, that's the limits of reconciliation, because it's supposed to be just budgetary issues. And there's something called the Byrd Rule. I won't go into any detail on that. But former Senator Robert Byrd established a precedent saying it's out of order to include anything that basically is extraneous to the budget process, like trying to pass substantive legislation. So we ought to be able to keep that off of any reconciliation bill.
All right, so we're most likely going to see this $1.9 trillion stimulus package go through reconciliation, most likely. Some programs are going to get cut, it looks like. What about future? You already have some Democrats talking about more stimulus payments, like monthly stimulus payments. Is that part of this, or is that part of another piece of legislation?
Well, there's no shortage of crazy ideas coming out of the loony left here in Washington, D.C. I do think there's some opportunity to deal with things like vulnerable supply chains from China and overseas, bringing more manufacturing jobs back on shore. I went to the White House a couple of weeks ago, and there seemed to be broad bipartisan, bicameral support for those sorts of programs, and vulnerabilities like semiconductor manufacturing, which I know seems like an arcane subject, but everything that's got an off and on switch uses a semiconductor or many semiconductors, and we're depending on overseas manufacturers to make those, not only for our sophisticated fifth-generation stealth fighters like the F-35, but for cell phones and automobiles. So I think there's areas like that. Infrastructure, we know our roads and bridges need to be maintained, and certainly in a state like ours that's growing, we need the transportation infrastructure. Those are areas where we can work together, but I'm afraid they're kind of poisoning the well here up front by jamming through this partisan $1.9 trillion bill. Yeah. I think there are a number of people, including me, who are going to be a little reticent then to go out and do some more spending, particularly after this binge. But we'll take it one step at a time.
All right, very good. Senator John Cornyn, as always, appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today and letting us know what's going on in the Senate and Congress and what can be done and what can't be done. We appreciate it.
You bet, Chad. Take care.
Thank you. That's U.S. Senator John Cornyn here on the Chad Hasty Show. News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO.